Hello and welcome. So my last YouTube video was about how this small Korg SQ1 sequencer worked with my Eurorack setup and a digital sequencer. But in this video, I'm going to talk about how this Korg SQ1 might integrate with the Moog grandmother, or really any other semi-modular synthesizer that gives you some CV gates and inputs. A lot of times when people think about expanding a semi-modular, they think about a small Eurorack setup, what other utility modules. But one thing that can really add a lot for not a lot of money is a sequencer, especially this Korg SQ1 or something like it that offers actually two sequences you can be playing. It gives you basically two more sources of modulation that could be synced and tied to the instrument, giving you a lot of options. So hopefully I can show you a few tips and tricks, and maybe no matter what your gear is, you can kind of take these ideas and put them into your rig. So I hope this helps, and let's get started. Cool. So the first thing is not uncommon. Lots of people do this with the Moog grandmother that has two oscillators. So a synthesizer like this is typically seen as monophonic. You know, I'm playing one note at a time. When I switch to the other note, it changes. So monophonic. But what if you want to get more than one note out of it? Well, it's interesting because the Moog grandmother provides a pitch input right here. The interesting thing about the pitch input is it is relative to the start note. So whatever note you play, the pitch input will either add on to that if the voltage is positive or subtract from that if the voltage is negative. So in this case, you know, I've got the SQ1 set up to be two separate sequences. I'm going to take the output of the first. If you hold function here, you can set things like the voltage range, 1 volt, 2 volt, 5 volt, and 8 volt. If you're doing modulation, you probably want 8 volt and linear. You want the whole range there to do a lot with. If you're doing what we're doing right here, I'm actually doing 1 volt and a major scale. And we will see why in just a second, because whatever note I play, I can build the major scale off of it with the second oscillator. So if I hit right here, and so you may hear that changing. Actually, I have to hit the note every time. The sequencer isn't running. It's in step jump mode, so you can trigger. And I think in this case, I've got like a 1, 3, 5, and then an octave up. So down, 1, 3, 5, octave up. So you can see suddenly I've got a duophonic synthesizer. I'm not just playing one note. By using the sequencer and playing by hand, I can actually play, you know, chords, two-note chords, and other patterns. And that's useful, and that's kind of fun, but the fun actually increases a little bit when you go to play the sequence. So you can see I've actually got a sequence of changing patterns, and depending on what note I'm playing, those changing patterns will change notes. If I'm on the 1, the 4, and the 5, they're pretty consonant. If I'm on, you know, a minor third, a minor seventh, the 4 and the 3 and the 5 are all dissonant from that. So you can kind of play with the different patterns that creates. You can turn off active steps and just have it be a little bit more simplistic. So let's just see it cycle through this 1, 3, 4 octave. Cool. Yeah, so you can see how that just, even alone, one connection, one sequencer, this Korg SQ1 is pretty cheap, so you can already see how much more that provides in terms of options here. You can do this not just with a sequencer, with another CV controlled keyboard, a MIDI to CV converter, anything that provides voltage you can do here. The main thing is with this option, you probably want it quantized. I'm setting it to a major scale here. If it's not quantized, it's also fun too, but you might have to work harder to get something that sounds as cohesive and musical as that. Maybe you just want some random noise and bleeps and bloops, and modular is great for that. So the linear mode or something that outputs just straight analog voltage will be great for that too. Cool, yeah, and one more note on that. I did pick the major scale. That's what I was choosing. You can pick minor, chromatic to find your notes in between that, or like I said, totally linear. This is just a straight voltage input. It's 1 volt per octave. So when you pick 1 volt here, you know, the highest value will be 1 octave up from where you are. It's a unipolar output from this. It's all positive voltage. So it's 1 octave up from where you are. 2 volts would be 2 octaves up from where you are. 5, 5, 8, 8 volts. So you can see you can get a lot of range from this. You need to set your oscillator where you want it, and this is all additive on top of that. Other sequencers may be able to do negative or something like that, but this is strictly positive unipolar voltage. So cool. So on top of just being able to do the pitch input, play it, and let this be your main sequencer, one interesting question, and this is a reason a lot of people might not think to pair a sequencer with the grandmother, is it's got a great sequencer built into it. It's really immediate. You can record sequences really fast. So what happens if we pair this, which has, you know, 2 lanes of either pitch or modulation, with our current sequencer, which already has a whole lane of pitch? I think you'll see we can get a lot of really cool rhythmic, very complex sounding options out of what seems to be a pretty simple synth at the start. So let's take our clock output from the back of the grandmother, run it up here to the N of the SQ1. You can do different divisions and stuff. I'm not going to get into all that in the video. Read the SQ1 manual. You can really break down, but this will hopefully give you a starting place. So I think I've got it set to a sequence that... Cool, so just kind of a nice major key sounding sequence. So you can already see when I press play, this is clocked. It's running at 16th notes compared to the quarter note there. So we have this very quick 4-bar sequence cycling through the 1, 3, 5 and all that over top of, you know, I think it's a 16 note or whatever sequence I have stored in here. So it already sounds pretty complex. You can turn off active steps. I'm in active step mode, so you can just get 2. So you'd have it be like a 5th, an octave. You can turn on 3 active steps to have this kind of polyrhythmic pattern of 3 versus the 16 notes there. There I'm having 2 notes an octave up, 1 note an octave down. You can start it whenever you want. If you have this ready, it'll start when you press play. Or you can wait to start it. Another thing you can do with the grandmother when you're doing this, you can sync, which will make this sync to this pitch, which is kind of cool because you're pulling it all over the place, making it up and down by harmonic intervals, and then you'll hear it. I'll play it without. You can even tune it a 5th up. Reverb, now we're sounding nice. Yeah, you can detune it just a touch. And when you cut sync off, you definitely want to be in tune either a fifth or somewhere in the middle, because you'll notice it when you kick sync off if you're off just a little bit, how maybe thick and nice it sounds, or how dissonant and terrible it sounds if you're like in between steps. Cool, so the next thing to do, we've got one pattern. We're just using this A sequence, but in this mode, we have a B sequence working as well. So one thing we can do with that is take it to interesting patch points on our synth. So we can take another patch cable, take the B output, actually run it to the cutoff input right here. We can take the cutoff way down because, again, this is additive. So this B row right here, one thing that I like to do is turn all the steps down at the start. Then you can really hear where you're gonna. So that one went all the way up. Cool, so what you heard there, this row was controlling specifically the cutoff, and again, it's additive. If this generated negative voltage, it would also be subtractive from where this was, I believe. So you can hear it all adds on top of what I have going on there. And so I have a pretty complex pattern of some changing steps, some changing pitches, and a changing sequence from the sequencer. So what seems to be a simple synth at the start is generating a pretty complex pattern. It's multiple notes, duophonic. I'm alternating this cutoff rhythmically. So we have this cool rhythmic pattern developed with just the sequencer and this semi-modular. Other things you can do, you can take the steps, again, active steps all the way down. I'll do that right now, demo it down to 2, show how you can kind of build a rhythm, go back to the polyrhythm, and then go back to the whole thing. So let's try that. This one is most turned up, so that is accenting on a pattern that's changing over the root pattern. Cool, and so now I've got a definite more polyrhythmic thing. I've got a pattern of 5 changing the pitch of oscillator 2, a pattern of 3 kind of stepping through which note is accented based on the cutoff, and a pattern of 16 again, I think, coming from this step sequencer. So this is really generating a lot of complexity, but it's also a lot of familiarity. You know, the root notes are staying the same in a bar of 16, but all these accents are changing. So you kind of have this, you could probably mathematically figure out, you know, what the least common denominator of all those things are and how long that pattern is. But if you're changing things by hand, now you've suddenly got a lot of complexity happening that you wouldn't necessarily program in straight with a single sequencer. And as you cut these on and off, you can make something that seems very repetitive and take it and evolve it, you know, as you are feeling. Another thing we can add in is this mod wheel. It's pretty typical, doesn't even involve this SQ1 at all. We can take this mod, sync it using, you know, just the gate output to the sync in on the modulation. We can change it to being a pulse on oscillator 2, make this affect the pulse width. So again, just trying to find something rhythmic that works, that sounds a little different, kind of keeping track of what we have running. Find something that changes it a little bit, provides some kind of modulation, some kind of pulse, some kind of like different thing on a rhythmic beat that gives us more interest and more emotion. We may be going for glitchier, we may be going for smoother. You can use the wave shape, you can use what these are, how extreme your settings are between all of them to get the result you're looking for. But these are just kind of some parameters, some ideas to get you moving in a maybe more complex direction than you would have thought is possible with just a simple sequencer and a semi-modular synth. Yeah, so I think that's enough for now. I might dive back in later with some other things like running the clock from this or running the clock off of this to provide more staggered notes. Maybe some other options like that. I haven't even touched the gate outputs on this. This is straight just the CV outputs from the Korg SQ1. So I hope this gives you some ideas to expand your semi-modular synth or your Eurorack setup, even with a simple little sequencer like this. So I hope you enjoy, and if you have any cool ideas or thoughts or questions, please leave them in the comments. Thank you so much.